Is going on, everybody? Victor here with a brand new video. And yes, UFC 258 is around the corner, about 24 hours away. Tomorrow on Saturday night, UFC 258 will be going down from the UFC Apex facility in Las Vegas, Nevada, here in the good old US of A. Obviously, I haven't really talked about any of these fights that are going down over the past couple of weeks or so because the fights just, they don't excite me, honestly. I don't believe that the UFC put a lot of effort into making this card. I believe they just wanted to have another pay-per-view just so they can keep the ball rolling because they put all their chips in one card, which just happens to be UFC 259. If you guys haven't looked at the card yet, it is extremely stacked. When I mean stacked, I mean that even the prelims and the early prelims are extremely stacked with a bunch of good fights. And when you look at the UFC 258 card, it's just not working for me, man. It's really not. If you look at the main card, there's obviously 5 fights on there. You've got Usman versus Burns, you've got Macy Barber versus Alexa Grasso, you've got Julian Marquez versus Maki Patolo, you've got Bobby Green versus Jim Miller, both OGs of the game, and then you've got another fight in there, which is Ian Heinisch versus Kelvin Gastelum. I believe that the fight between Ricky Simone and Brian Keller definitely could have squeezed into that main card, if you ask me, because those are two very exciting fighters in their own rights, and I believe that they always bring it into the octagon whenever they step inside of it. So, obviously, there are a couple of fights either on the prelim or the early prelim that could have made it into that main card, just because there's not really that much competition going on. Obviously, you got Burns versus Usman. I did make a preview out of that fight a couple of months ago. I'm definitely going to put it up towards the end of this video, so you'll be able to find it there. There are some other fights as well that do intrigue me a little bit. Ian Heinisch versus Kelvin Gastelum. Ian Heinisch is coming off of a win against Jared Mershaw, which was TKO in the first round. And then you also got Kelvin Gastelum that's coming off of 3 straight losses. He lost to Israel Adesanya, who was... Both those guys are trying to fight each other for the... they did fight each other for the interim middleweight championship in the UFC. Obviously, Kelvin Gastelum took Izzy to the full 5 rounds. So it was a back-and-forth slugfest, and absolutely loved it. He lost that by unanimous decision. Next thing you know, he goes on to face Darren Till on that BMF main card. He was the co-main against Darren Till. Darren Till was making his middleweight debut, and he lost that as well. I believe it was split decision or unanimous, but it was a decision overall. He lost that. Comes back 1 year later, Fight Island, and he gets submitted in the first round against Jack Hermanson via leg lock. So obviously, Kelvin Gastelum needs a win. If he doesn't get another win, if he ends up losing and goes 0-4 in his last 4 fights, and he's probably going to get shipped to a different company because the UFC isn't having it nowadays with fighters that are on big losing streaks. Unless you're a legend, or if you're an OG of the game, they'll keep you to the very end till the wheels fall off. But another fight that I'm interested in, obviously, is the Brian Keller versus Ricky Simone. I do believe that Ricky Simone is going to win that fight via unanimous decision. I don't believe he's going to be able to submit Brian Keller because Brian Keller is a very tough individual. You'd have to throw everything, including the kitchen sink, in order to get him out of there inside 3 rounds. So I believe that fight's going to go to unanimous decision in the favor of Ricky Simone, just because he's going to bring it on with this wrestling and this pressure that he always does in the majority of his fights. Alexa Grasso versus Macy Barber. Macy Barber basically had a whole year layoff because she tore up her whole entire ACL with this last fight against Roxanne Modafferi. She was looking pretty good until she tore her knee up. She was still in it for another 2 more rounds. So obviously she had a lot to give, and she had a lot of resilience going into that fight. But nonetheless, she did lose by unanimous decision because she did tear her ACL in the first round of that fight. And Bobby Green versus Jim Miller, like I said, these guys are basically legends in their own right. Jim Miller has a lot of records that he's already broken inside the UFC. I believe the most fights, the most close to the most performance, post-fight performances, all that kind of stuff. He's been with the UFC for a very, very long time, and I believe he has more than 30-some fights with the UFC. So obviously, I believe he has more. I think with this fight, actually no, I have no idea. With this fight, he's probably going to be tied with Cowboy Cerrone, but other than that, he has broken a lot of records in the UFC. Time being in the UFC, a lot of fights with the UFC, finishes, bonuses, all that. He's basically in the top five of all those different categories, and he keeps breaking records to this day. So, obviously, 258, what to expect. If you ask me what my prediction is going to be for the Usman versus Burns fight, I'm going to go with Usman. I believe Usman's going to be able to pull it out of the bag. I know both these guys are former training partners. They used to train with each other over in Hard Knocks 365, which is now Stanford MMA over in Deerfield Beach, Florida, I believe. And obviously, if you ask me, I believe that these guys are still going to be friends even after the fight, but I don't believe that Kamaru Usman is going to be coming back to Stanford MMA anytime soon, even though that he's been there for the majority of his MMA career. I think he's going to stay with Trevor Whitman and all of Elevation Fight team over in Colorado, just because I believe he's been able to evolve his game even more, increase his cardio, increase his stamina, being in Elevation over there in Denver, and just increase his overall MMA performance. How he does inside of the octagon, how he does outside of the octagon, his cardio, his strength, his durability, the volume that he throws, and he's just a hard guy to crack. I don't believe anyone's going to beat Kamaru Usman anytime soon, but if there's a fighter out there that's going to lay out the groundwork, that's going to lay out the blueprint for all the other fighters out there to get Kamaru Usman in trouble, it's definitely going to be Gilbert Burns. Colby Covington started it a little bit, but he didn't survive that whole entire fight. It was a very close fight, if you ask me. I believe that Kamaru Usman was edging things out because his shots did have a lot more power, but Colby really pushed Usman to the max, to the edge, and he did lay out a little bit of a framework on how to defeat Kamaru Usman, but Burns is going to pick up on what Colby started, and he's just going to lay it out even more, and fighters in the future are going to be able to prepare better for Kamaru Usman once they fight them and know a little bit more of what Kamaru Usman has to bring to the table, even though that he is evolving his game plans with Team Elevation. So let me guys know what you think about these fights down in the comments section. Obviously, I'm not a big fan of the majority of them. There are a lot of names I don't really know, so I'm probably not going to watch the prelims and the early prelims until tomorrow when they're on. I mean, not tomorrow, but on Sunday when they're on replay on ESPN Plus. I'm mostly just going to watch the main card. There were some really good fights that were supposed to be slated for this card, but because of COVID-19, some fights had to be rearranged, some fights had to be moved, and some fights just had to be scrapped altogether. So, and one of those fights just happened to be Jimmy Rivera versus Pedro Munoz, and that fight was supposed to start out the main card, which I thought was an amazing fight to happen because both those guys are amazing fighters in their own right, and they have they have a lot to lose. Obviously, both those guys are trying to crack into the top 5 again in the UFC bantamweight divisions, and sadly that won't happen until another date in the future. But let me know, guys, how you feel in the comment section about this whole entire card. Do you think that that the UFC basically just kind of scraped this card under the rug and just did whatever they wanted to do with it, since they have a extremely stacked card full of a bunch of amazing fighters on UFC 259, or is it because they just wanted to add another main event pay-per-view card the following month after UFC 257, which did have a lot of success as well in its own right. But like I said, I don't think that UFC 258 is going to pull out a lot of numbers. I honestly don't. I just don't. There's not that much talent. There's not that many intriguing matchups. Dana, I just think he just BS the whole entire card, and I just think he's just looking forward to UFC 259 because they got three title fights in one card, and a lot of other fighters in general that just piqued the interest of the masses. But other than that, let me know how you guys feel. Once again, like, comment, subscribe, ring the notification bells, just to let you guys know when I have videos coming out. I'll let you know as soon as possible. And like I said, I'm sorry I haven't put out any videos. It's just this card isn't interesting. But take it easy, guys. Stay safe. Stay blessed. Later.